Hello everyone, welcome to an analysis session of a game I played last night in the League of Mayhem Chess League. As I seem to be doing in a lot of my league matches, I play on board 1, and I was facing against another player who I believe in the past, according to a friend of mine, has been about 2300 before, and he has dropped a bit in recent games, but still has some good ability. And in this match I was actually black, so I'm flipping the board. There we go. So I decided that, seeing as he's a fairly old school player, he's been a sort of veteran of many tournaments and the like, I thought instead of playing a line that he is very comfortable with, for example here I could play e6 leading to a Nimzo Indian. That would be absolutely fine. Also potentially d5 or even c5 afterwards, leading to Benoni's. Could play c5 straight away, again probably leading to a Benoni, or Benko. But it could also lead to those slightly boring systems where white plays e3. And I could go d6 as well, which would lead to most likely a King's Indian or equivalent. Could also be a kind of check system as well with c6 afterwards, but that's a bit boring. And I could also maybe play c6, although here it's a bit weird to play c6 now, trying to lead to a Slav. But I choose none of those, and I play the Budapest opening, which, funnily enough, computers absolutely hate this move. Although I'm not sure the computer's suggestion of pawn c6 is entirely the right move there. I think probably e6 is the best, or the move that gives black in human level playing games the greatest chance of not losing, I suppose, if you just judge on results. And e5 is an interesting move. If white doesn't take it, black has a very, very nice game, and clearly has activated a lot of the center and their pieces, and it has good coordination. So white pretty much has to accept the challenge of capturing. And the good news is I've played this many times in my I suppose you could call it career, or sort of chess life, when I've played in long play tournaments and even league matches in the past. I have a very good record with this, and I know the theory up to about move 15 in almost every line. And against a player who is more, I would assume, more classically inclined, plays more, down the line, good openings, shall we say, he may not know the theory as well as I do. So after about a minute or so, he thought about it. He played the mainline move, which is bishop f4, guarding the pawn, which on paper is not too hard to find, but knight f3 gives black lots of independent options. And here there are two main moves for black. One of them is knight c6, which I played in the game, but the other one, which I have played before in a few matches, and I have a relatively good record, is g5. This move looks very strange because you're not often playing g5 as black, unless I think it was Kramnik who played it in a famous game. But white has to do something with the bishop, and if they drop back to, say, d2, you can take e5. So they drop to g3. Then knight c6 is a move, but I prefer playing bishop g7 immediately to give myself a reason for having played g5. Knight f3 is the most common move, and then knight c6. White shouldn't really be trying to hold this pawn desperately with things like queen d5, because I can always play queen e7 and eventually win the pawn. So what often happens is they strike straight back, going for the pawn. And then we get some very tricky opening lines. So for example, I can play h6, we can have a trade, and then neither side of us can castle kingside, because we trade rooks. There is also the move which is not the most accurate, but it is quite fun, playing knight takes e5. And if white accepts the challenge yet again, and does knight takes g5, you can then go queen e7. And surprisingly enough, this does give black some compensation here, at least in human level games. If you switch on a computer, which I will humour you and turn it on. Let's see where we are. If I make the screen a bit bigger, there we go. So it gives white having half a pawn's worth of advantage with the move knight c3. e3 is about a third, or 2/5, I guess, of advantage, but then those are the only two moves that give white anything. And you know, I mean, you might say, well, they're obvious. You know, surely you play that, which is true. But a lot of players might go e4 because they think, all right, occupy the center, you know, charge forwards. And e4 is a bit too weakening because I can target e4 more easily, and also the light squared f1 bishop won't really have much areas to move along. So knight c3 is the correct move, and then the main point is that queen b4, you know, pins, attacks two pawns immediately, and definitely has a lot of you know, counter chances aligned with it. And actually, I thought e3 was the main move, although queen b3 is certainly playable. The line I know is e3, and then queen takes b2 is the move I usually do. h6 is apparently like a touch better, potentially, and d6 is more natural because you attempt to develop your c8 bishop. But queen takes b2, again, white can go wrong very easily, and knight d5 is literally the only move. Knight b5 is often what my opponents do because they think that they could trap my queen with knight b5, but if they do that, I have queen b4 check, and it's equal. So knight d5, I castle in these lines, and if they play knight c7, it is not a good move. So, for example, knight c7, I have check, and then white's really in trouble. They have to play king e2, because queen d2, their rook gets taken. So they play this. I have queen takes c4. I think I do have some other moves as well. I was thinking possibly knight b4 as a move, but I don't really like it. So I prefer queen c4, because you know, you win a pawn, you get another check in. Queen d3 is unavailable because of our knight. So king back to e1, and you at least have a draw in this line. So you can go queen c3 again, king d2, and if you want the draw, you have queen c4 check. If you want the win, I think it's queen b2 check, and then it gets really sort of difficult, just like earlier, where black has to like walk a tightrope in order to prove advantage. But I think I had one game where I played knight b4 because I thought it was easier to work out because of knight c7 being attacked. And in the game, rook c1 was the best move according to the computer, but they took my rook. I put check. They played king e1, and then I had knight c2, and I won the game. But anyway, this is the sort of counterplay that black always wants. Lots of attacking chances. White's king and their pieces are badly coordinated, and they only have a pawn or two, or occasionally a rook, to show for it. I was thinking g5, but in the game I thought I would play more natural with the other mainline move, knight c6. Knight f3, defending the pawn. Bishop b4 check. Here, if you play bishop c5 to attack f2, white simply has e3. You don't really gain any counter attack. You want to play queen e7, but if you do it immediately, the bishop on f8 is blocked in. So you need to make a bishop move, which doesn't give white enough time to consolidate. So the check makes more sense. And the main line move is knight c3, which I think is the most popular by a very small amount. And then you take the knight, double up their pawns, then play queen e7, and the game is more or less sort of, well, white still does have some advantage, like a third of a pawn. But again, in computer play, white's better, but in practical play, I believe black has achieved equality. Knight d2 is the more reasonable move, which I play when I'm white. On those rare occasions anyone is ridiculous enough to play the Budapest Gambit. Queen e7, e3 to develop the pieces. There's a fun line where if the move a3 is chosen here to attack the bishop, instead of running away, you actually take the pawn because your plan is knight d3 checkmate. So then white has to play pawn e3. And your bishop, surprisingly enough, actually has some places it can move to. For example, bishop d6 is an interesting move. You're attempting to trade everything, so this is quite fun. Bishop c5 is also like an interesting move. I don't like it very much, but it's playable just about. But yeah, I've had a few games, bishop d6, bishop g3, and then just a very sort of equal game where we trade everything. And white still has a very small edge because of the rook on the h1 square, meaning you can't castle kingside, or at least not easily. And white can keep their king in the centre a bit longer. Yeah, and it's a slight advantage for white. So that's quite a fun line to play, although bishop c5 is also an option. And yeah, so here e3 was chosen in the game. I took, which is the mainline move. I believe you might be able to castle instead of taking immediately, but to be honest, the moves sort of transpose into each other, and I prefer taking now because there are some independent options that white has, which I don't want to give them. Yeah, we trade knights, bishop e2, which is the main line. Both sides now will castle, and here, for a very long time, the mainline move was bishop takes d2, because if you play the move d6, your bishop on b4 can often get trapped with knight to b3, and then the plan is for white to go a3, and that way it would force off your bishop for the white knight. In the Budapest positions, if you ever give the opponent the two bishops, they generally have quite a big advantage because there's not a lot of dynamic play available as counterplay, and it's a somewhat open centre. So the two bishops are worth a lot in these setups. And bishop takes knight was seen as the best way of simply ripping off the band-aid, as they say in America. I think, just quickly just move on and hope that you have some play for it. But the line that has been kind of revived in the last 10 years or so is the move knight g6 to attack the bishop. If white plays bishop c7 to take the pawn, what do you play as black here to get the advantage? You have the move d6. And essentially what will happen is white will lose their bishop for 2 pawns. And you, again, have a clear advantage in this line. So very, very useful. There's no move black can do. For example, queen a4 trying to kind of gain an attack on you. You just take the knight with your bishop on d2, and it's easy. Knight b3, queen takes bishop, a3, bishop c5, and again you're fine. So they don't take, they go bishop back. And then the move here, which I think is somewhat a counterintuitive move, you retreat the bishop back to d6 in order to trade off dark squared bishops. The correct move is what he played. Knight takes, forcing my queen to trade. You don't want double pawns in the centre of the board, which are also isolated, so the queen is the piece that you have to take. And a lot of players here as white will simply, against a higher rated player as well, play knight e4, then I trade queens and play d6, and black is equal, with not a great chance to win, but I can play on any position really and try to slowly grind out a better position. But queen c2 is the best move, which is played here. White's trying to put rooks on d and c because they're going for the centre and queen side. Queen e7 to play d6, and the two main moves are c5 to try and sort of prevent d6, which doesn't really work because I take it anyway. But knight e4 is the other move, which is played by him, d6. And the reason for knight e4 is not to give rook d1 the open file, but it's actually to put the knight on d5 in the future. So from d2, you swing your knight to d5 in 3 turns. Then bishop e6 to target the pawn and activate the bishop, connecting the rooks. And this is about the extent of the theory that I know. I haven't seen f4 in a game, but I think I might have seen it in one or two matches in the past, and it's not a move that really jumps out at me as being the strongest, because even though it gives the space advantage on the king side to black, you're making your e3 pawn very weak. And the only real reason I can see for this is to prevent my knight on g6 from having any good squares, but also to play f5, which would fork bishop and knight on a tactical level. I play the move f5 to keep their e3 pawn from coming to e4 with a big space advantage, stop f5 from white, and also activate my f8 rook a little bit. Rook fe1, because white doesn't have any plans to play g4 or some other rubbish. They're going to go for the center. Then here, I think I play a very, very nice move. What would you play as black? I'm always going for targets in my opponent's half of the board, and the two targets that suggest themselves to me are the e3 pawn, which is unguarded, and the c4 pawn, which is already being attacked by my bishop. Now, if I play some move like bishop d7 to attack e3, white can simply play bishop f3, defend the pawn with the rook, and I've retreated my bishop while they've improved theirs by moving forwards onto the long diagonal. To me, bishop d7 or bishop f7 don't really do anything. They don't improve my pieces. What I want to do is improve my knight, which is not easy to do. Knight h4 is, to me, not making any sense. Nice on the rim. g3 could simply force me back to g6, and I've lost a tempo. And the provoking of g3 from white, I don't think is going to really harm them in that position. So my plan was to put my knight on c6, which would control the dark squares on the queen side. That will be useful to prevent white from gaining too much control on that side, and also control the center of the board as well. And it has a lot more places to move to. It also prevents bishop f3 taking b7, because the knight would be blocking it. So that's where I want my knight. And in order to get there, I need the e7 square, which means the queen needs to move. Therefore, I targeted c4. Actually, here it was next move. Oh dear, terrible memory. So yeah, actually I improved the worst piece, which was the a rook to e8. I thought my attack was on the center and king side. I don't want to fight on the queen side so much, because I think white already has that area more or less under control, or that's where they're going to be attacking. So rook a e8 puts my rooks in the center and king side. Yeah, then g3 was played to prevent knight h4. And yes, here I played queen f7 to attack c4, forcing white to address the issue. And if knight d5, I had been looking at that move, and I was thinking of simply playing c6, which would win the pawn if white was not very careful. I don't really want to take unless I win something. And I hadn't analysed this position in depth at this time, because knight d5 felt a bit wrong somehow. White hasn't improved the rooks or the bishop. And if bishop takes knight, pawn takes pawn, I might have to move rook takes e3. And I go a pawn up, and I don't think white has enough compensation, even though it's bishop against knight. So if I turn on the computer, I believe that will give me the advantage here. Knight d5 feels wrong. Yes, c6 though, my first instinct was correct. Bishop takes d5 still gives a very small advantage for black though. And the move c6 forces knight b4, I believe, because then the white bishop and queen are still guarding c4, but then I have to move a5, forcing the knight to d3, and finally bishop c4. And what's very nice is if white tries some big, sort of attack with knight e5, thinking if I take the knight with the pawn, they'll take my bishop with the bishop, and then pin my queen to the king, I can actually not take the knight with the pawn, but take it with my own knight. And it's not enough. White will take back, then I can trade. White will also take back, and I suspect, even though takes looks quite nice, having a good centre of pawns, I prefer rook takes because you can then activate both rooks on the e-file. and target the e3 pawn. It's already nearly -3 in this position. So in just a few turns, white can go seriously wrong. This is not that easy to play for white, nor for black, to be honest, from this position. Bishop f3 was the move I was thinking he may do, and then we might trade some pawns. But he played a very sensible move, b3, to defend c4. Then his bishop can come to f3 and attack b7. I don't really want to be playing b6, putting all my pawns on dark squares, because that will give white a lot of places to exploit on the light squares. So just in time, my knight maneuvers to c6. White has improved their rook and then improves their bishop, so it's playing very well here. And I thought, right, where is the next piece to improve? And at this point, I did spend a minute or two on this move, I think, maybe a bit long, maybe a bit less. But it was fairly obvious to me because I've had this kind of position many, many times. But if you haven't had this position before, you may miss what the best move is. What would you play as black? Right. So what you may be thinking, which to be fair is what I plan to do in the future, might be to improve the rooks, because your f8 rook, despite it being on f8 on the f file, it's not quite enough. So the idea of rook e7, rook f e8, not a terrible plan. Like, that's something you could do. You could try improving the queen with queen f6. Also not bad, but then maybe knight d5 could leave some trouble for you. And the bishop on e6, it can't really be made any better than it currently is. So you can't improve the bishop a great deal yet. But the piece that you may want to improve now is the king, because the bishop can often come to d5 and then put you in check or pin you, a bit like pin your queen to the king. It's a very awkward place for your king in these positions, and you'd be amazed how many tactical sequences end with white saving the game or even winning with bishop d5 check way ahead in the future. So in these kind of positions, it is very prudent and often the book move in the opening to play a move king h8, keeping all the tension and waiting for white to declare what it is they're doing. Now white played a very nice maneuver, which to me just highlighted that white has the advantage in this line, and he either knows a lot of theory or he's a very, very, very strong middle game player. What is white's best plan here? Right, so some of you might think e4, because that would break in the center of the board, but to be honest, the move e4 gives me what I want, which is play in the center and the king side. It may be playable in the future, but I don't think white should be doing it now. Again, the queen side is where you want to be fighting. The moves I was looking at were things like a3, b4 in the future, where white has to then struggle to not lose the c4 pawn or to mess up their own queen side. Also, knight d5, controlling the center and queen side, would also be good. I think knight d5 is the move I was contemplating here, and trying to decide what to do next. My plan was to try and get knight e7 to work at some stage, or to take and then play knight b4. But instead, queen g2 was played, which is a fantastic move because it targets my knight on c6 and the pawn on b7. If I play knight d8 or knight a5, b7 is still sufficiently attacked. Therefore, piece moves, bishop d5. And this is another good reason why I played king h8, because if my king was on the g8 square still, white could win a pawn with the move bishop d5. I would have to block back with my bishop, and then they could take my knight. So they sort of gain a tempo and then take the knight and the pawn afterwards with the queen. So you can see already, king h8 was an extremely useful move. But then white played queen back to d2, still keeping their advantage, and they've subtly improved the queen, making a battery, and potentially playing c5 to target my bishop. And at this stage I felt like if white really wants to, they could simply move around and not do anything, and I can't like break through without messing up my structure. So it's possible that black is simply maneuvering around, trying to essentially keep the game level. And also, he is subtly improving his pieces, which is not that easy to do here. So he must play the middle game very, very well. And I thought this was a good time to throw in a draw offer with the move bishop e6. My opponent accepted, and I got a draw. Which also, the other reason I took the draw was because, or offered the draw I should say, is because on our 4-board match, our board 2 player was basically already won. He was a exchange up in an ending with no difficulties. And our other 2 games looked good as well. And I thought, alright, if I take the draw, we'll win on board 2. We'll almost certainly win one of the 2 games on the bottom 2 boards, and that will win us the match. So there's no reason for me to risk everything here, trying to beat someone only a little bit weaker than myself. So I may as well be happy with the draw as black, in an opening which is generally not considered that amazing. And I was quite happy with my performance, because after the game, on the computer analysis, I pretty much did all the moves correct. I played, but first, 15 moves or so, up until white played f4, book moves, and then my moves here were just sort of in keeping with improvement of pieces, combined with a little bit of sort of middle game knowledge of the Budapest. And as well, my opponent played extremely well too. He played, I think every single move was either book or it was like the first or second choice of the computer. So very nice game from both of us. Good draw. I thought that was a good result. It was a fair result. And hopefully you've liked this video, and see you next time. Bye.